Welcome to the Global Justice Report. This is an online production of the Center for Global Justice in San Miguel Allende, Mexico. I'm Betsy Bowman, and I'm the host for today's program. Our program is entitled, as you see, Chevron, the parasite who took over its hosts. Hosts, of course, should be plural because it has lots of hosts that is taken over, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The Center for Global Justice, also known as El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in central Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering the solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, of course, we don't have our normal online in-person program, so we have switched to the webinar, which we really like, and I think we'll just keep doing the webinar as well as in-person programs when people return. Normally, this is the point at which we ask people to make a contribution to the Center for Global Justice because we don't have our usual income. But today, we will instead ask for contributions for Stephen Donziger's defense. And you can go to stephendonziger.com and make a donation online. The people on today's program are Andres Soto from Richmond, California, with Communities for a Better Environment. He's been involved in the struggle against Chevron, who took over the host community of Richmond, California years ago. And he will be speaking first about what the struggle against Chevron has been like in his town and in his area. We will then go to Marty Garbus, who is an attorney and friend of Stephen Donziger's. And I'm afraid that Stephen Donziger will not be able to join us today because the Chevron, he's a political prisoner of Chevron, apparently. And he has he lost his hearing yesterday in the courts of New York City, and Marty Garbus will tell us more about that when he joins us. But first, please welcome Andres Soto from Richmond, California, with Communities for a Better Environment. Please, Andres.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for having me here and to be able to share our story in Richmond. And so Richmond had the Santa Fe Railroad come in 1901, and in 1902, Pacific Oil Company started. It got absorbed into the Standard Oil family of John D. Rockefeller, and it was only in the 80s that it changed its name from Standard Oil of California to Chevron, as it is known now. And so the control of the city economy and the city government and the politics dates back to the beginning of the 20th century in our community. And the environmental justice movement that I'm part of came together really as a result of the convergence of both the burgeoning environmental movement that got going in the 60s, as well as the civil rights movement, particularly led by African Americans and Chicanos here in Richmond in the 1960s, and converged as environmental justice in the 70s and 80s. And so we have been carrying that mantle ever since. One of the issues that we had to confront was the control of our political system, the city council and the city administration by the corporate sector led by Chevron. In fact, in the 1980s, the manager of the Chevron Richmond plant had an office in City Hall adjacent to the city manager's office. Chevron was used to spending about $250,000 just regularly in local campaigns to control the city council, which is a very small amount of money considering the profits that they make out of that refinery. It's estimated that just its net profit from the Richmond Chevron refinery is between $125 and $150 million per year. That's the net profit. It is the largest refinery in Northern California, and it is Chevron's first refinery, the second one being in LA, El Segundo, which gave its name because it was the second refinery. So our approach here has really been multifaceted. In 2003, we created a political organization called the Richmond Progressive Alliance to unite really a variety of progressive causes, police accountability and stopping police violence, the environmental justice movement, the civil rights of non-white people living in Richmond, and the fundamental change in the economic structure of the city that we needed to see to achieve more justice for the people who live there. Because of Chevron's presence, Richmond has always had some of the worst socioeconomic factors in the Bay Area. Some of the lowest housing costs, some of the lowest educational attainment levels, some of the lowest property values, which means less property taxes, some of the most underperforming schools, despite all the wealth that's being generated by the refinery and other industries nearby. So our struggle for environmental justice in Richmond, like I said, has a long history, and people like Ethel Dotson and Henry Clark and Whitney Dotson and others were pioneers. Denny Larson was the first Communities for a Better Environment organizer here in Richmond back in the 80s, and then followed by Jessica Tovar. And I came on in August of 2012, 6 days after I started. The Richmond Chevron refinery blew up. It was management neglect, almost killed 20 workers, and it sent over 15,000 people to the local hospital. The image behind me is an image from that event. And I like to remind people that it was the anniversary of the United States dropping the first atomic bomb on a civilian population in Hiroshima. And that anniversary was the date that Chevron put a mushroom cloud over Richmond. One of the interesting stories about that gives you an example of how the network of power works in a community like Richmond is that most of the 15,000 people who reported for medical treatment to a local hospital called Doctors Medical Center, it was a public hospital district. People voted for the board of directors. Well, it had gotten in financial trouble, like many public hospitals all across the United States, because we do not have universal health care as we should. And so a local lobbyist got appointed to the board and to fill a vacancy. And he was a local Democratic Party operative, a guy named Eric Zell. Well, Eric Zell, as a lobbyist, represents Chevron and all the other refineries in Contra Costa County. And so in 2014, when Chevron was trying to get its modernization project approved by the Richmond City Council, a broad coalition of community members, including CBE, California Nurses Association, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and many other groups came together and said, look, we not only want some strong environmental conditions applied to this project, and all of them were adopted unanimously by the Planning Commission and forwarded to the City Council upon appeal by Chevron, because Chevron didn't like those conditions. And what they did was they dangled $30 million out in front of the City Council for a college scholarship program called Richmond Promise. And we said, we don't want your scholarship program, because if you really want to invest in children, we ought to have universal preschool and support our schools. But Eric Zell, being the lobbyist and being the chair of the board of the hospital, we were saying, look, we want Chevron to ensure that our hospital stays open. And instead, Eric Zell ensured that did not happen. The scholarship program was established. The environmental conditions were weakened. And 2 years later, that hospital shut down. It's closed. It was demolished, and now will become a parking lot for a casino that exists next door. So this is how they play hardball. In Richmond politics, Chevron has always created a coalition that involves itself. It involves the Council of Industries in Richmond, the Chamber of Commerce, who usually supports small business, but in Richmond, they've been co-opted to be a front for the corporate sector. And then the Richmond Police Officers Association and the Richmond Firefighters Association. So the two so-called public safety unions. And this is the cabal. And more recently, because of the role of the Richmond Progressive Alliance on the City Council, we've seen and pushing things like rent control. Richmond was the first city in over 30 years in California to vote to enact a form of rent control. What we've seen is the California Apartment Owners Association and California Realtors Association join this corporate cabal against the interests of the people in Richmond. Of course, we have fought back in many different fronts. One of the key fronts has been with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. Under the US system, you have the Clean Air Act. Essentially, every state creates its own EPA. And in California, we have also the California Air Resources Board as a result of that. And then what they've done is create local or regional air districts around the state. And in the Bay Area, we have the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And the board members are representatives of city and county government from the 9 Bay Area counties. It is a 24-member board. Because of the work of CBE and its allies back in the early 2000s, we saw the Bay Area Air Quality Management District adopt a rule, the first rule in the nation to actually make flaring an illegal activity unless it is part of a turnaround or a maintenance activity. Flaring is when a dangerous buildup of combustible gases occurs in a pipe. And so what they do is they vent it, and rather than putting that raw gas out into the atmosphere, they have like a pilot light at the top of the pipe, and it ignites the gases going out. And so throughout my lifetime, we have seen this activity. And in fact, this past weekend, when we had that Pineapple Express of rain, Chevron was flaring the entire weekend because they do not know how to run their refineries safely. And so that rule was adopted. And unfortunately, the fines are not enough to act as a deterrent. for Chevron engaging, or the other refineries for that matter, for engaging in this activity. And so another battle was we fought after the 2012 explosion and fire. We created a coalition that involved United Steelworkers Local 5, who represents the refinery workers, CBE, our ally APEN, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Blue Green Alliance, and the Labor Occupational Health Program at UC Berkeley. And we met for a year and we crafted a rule proposal for the air district that would reduce greenhouse gases, put a cap on them, which also would reduce the toxic particulate matter that impacts the Richmond community. It's like co-pollutants. And we got it one week prior to the board adopting it. The state legislature and Jerry Brown, you know, who's a really oily guy, they wanted to extend the false solution of cap and trade. And so in order to do that, he had to cut a deal to get Republicans on board. And he approached WISPA, the Western States Petroleum Association, which is their trade group, and they came up with a 10-point wish list. One of those was to prohibit local air districts from reducing greenhouse gases and reserve that power to California Air Resources Board, or CARB. And this is something that was completely out of the ordinary because that is the job of local air districts and it had never been the job of CARB. And so in order to try to assuage environmental justice communities, they created a law to go along with a companion bill called AB 617. And that had a number of provisions in it, including establishing community emissions reduction programs in highly impacted communities like Richmond. And so we advocated against both of those bills, but both of them passed, and we have now gone through that process, established an emissions reduction program and a steering committee, but it was not without a battle. And so I had put in the chat here a link to this GRIST article where you could read it yourself. It tells the story of that battle, and that battle is still ongoing. The steering committee is examining data and has yet to make any recommendations. It's a delay tactic from actually taking action. But more recently, one of the provisions of AB 617 was to require local air districts to impose the best available retrofit control technology, or BART, on refineries, and particularly their catalytic cracker unit, which is the heart of the refinery. It's the piece of equipment where the crude oil goes in, it's heated up to around 650 degrees, it's infused with chemicals like sulfuric acid and hydrogen to crack the oil molecules that then become the different gases that are siphoned off at different levels based on their weight to become products like gasoline, aviation fuel, lubricants, diesel, that type of thing. Single most polluting piece of equipment and in the refinery. And so that was a 2-year battle. But in June or July of this year, we had a major victory, and that victory was a 19-3 vote to impose the strongest, most strict standard of 0.01 microns for the elimination of this particulate matter. That will reduce the toxic particulate matter coming out of the catalytic cracker unit by 70 to 90%. And that's the stuff that we at the local level breathe in, and it's so small, it passes through the lungs and directly into the bloodstream, which causes the autoimmune system to go wacko, which is why we have disproportionate rates of asthma, disproportionate rates of cancer, psoriasis, heart disease, and other illnesses directly related to this refinery pollution. I should step back and say that in 2012, that event became, the explosion of the refinery became a major organizing opportunity, and several new coalitions emerged. But to tie it into Stephen Danziger, we were well aware of his work in Ecuador, and our former mayor, Gail McLaughlin, who is now a council member, actually went down to Lago Agrio and observed firsthand the damage that Chevron Texaco had done in Ecuador. And on the 1-year anniversary of the fire, we had a major march in Richmond where we had over 3,000 people gather at the Richmond BART station and march through town and go down to the Chevron refinery. And we had over 400 people volunteer to be arrested for trespassing on Chevron property. After 4 hours, we had 209 people arrested, and we called it a victory. But one of the things that happened that day was in the San Francisco Chronicle, the Ecuador government took out a full-page ad declaring the solidarity of the people of Ecuador with the people in Richmond. So we are long aware of Chevron's damages in Ecuador, in Nigeria, and right now down in Myanmar. So we understand that we are part of an international movement for environmental justice and holding, the oil mafia accountable. And so in Richmond, we have now engaged developing a campaign. We're working on what we call a just transition, but we are calling for the decommissioning of the Chevron refinery. We're calling for the decommissioning, but with conditions. Chevron is responsible for about 25% of the general fund of the city of Richmond through its property taxes. We need to continue to get that hole filled. We also understand that this is a toxic site that has been in operation for over 100 years, almost 120 years, and it's going to be a tremendous cleanup. We saw with the PES refinery in Philadelphia that they just file bankruptcy in a holding company and walk away from it. And so the people of Philadelphia were stuck with that toxic site. We don't want that to happen to Richmond, and we're exploring what sort of financial mechanisms we can use right now while Chevron is still in operation to pay into that so that we can have funding to clean up the site once the refinery is decommissioned. We also want to see that the workers are made whole, and because of the historic economic inequalities that result in Richmond from Chevron's presence, we want to see those benefits for training into the renewable energy sector to not just be limited to the people who are working in the refinery, but also be extended to the people in Richmond who have been excluded from those jobs. So Chevron is the largest private employer in Richmond, but Chevron also only hires about 5% of its workforce are local people. So 95% of the people are carpetbaggers who don't work, who don't live in Richmond, but work at the Chevron Richmond refinery. And we are dedicated to this along with many of our allies. And we are very excited about the opportunity to work on decommissioning. We think that we are really setting the pace with this, for example, with this Rule 6-5 on the cat crackers. That's the first in the nation, just like the flaring rule. So we hope that that will become a standard in other air districts that will reduce toxic pollution in our local communities. And we are training the next generation. And we are also right now examining and just did a presentation last night to the Richmond City Council on the threat that biofuels, which are tax subsidized right now, and the increasing production of hydrogen through natural gas present to our communities, as opposed to the greenwashing of these technologies that the oil industry is trying to promote right now. So that is a Cliff Notes version of our experience in Richmond, and I guess I'll just stop there, and I'll wait for any questions after we hear other presentations.
Thank you so much, Andres. We all know that refining oil is a very complex process and gives off terrible contamination throughout the entire process. But it's shocking to think of how many different points there are where refineries and the fossil fuel industry in general can contaminate and harm the health of the people in the neighborhood and people around, and of course around the world, because they're everywhere. And we see that they don't hesitate to save $1 on a barrel, the cost of a barrel, even at the cost of the lives and the health of the people around them. And of course, the example of Chevron in Ecuador will make this even more revoltingly obvious. And that's why I think of the power of what I call the thanatocracy, from the Greek word thanos, that means death. The ruling elites, they're very, conflicted in lots of different groups, but they're perfectly willing to sacrifice the lives of any number of people on the planet, billions of people on the planet, to pursue their profit. And with COP26 coming up, and the statements made yesterday by the Secretary General of the UN, Guterres, it's obvious that the enemy that we have, the fossil fuel industry, is so incredibly powerful, and stopping new exploration isn't nearly enough, but we need to demand the decommissioning of all of these refineries as well. Our next guest was to be Stephen Donziger, but Stephen was in court yesterday, and once again, we're hoping to raise money for the Free Donziger campaign for his legal defense fund, which you can do at freedonziger.com. Stephen is on his way to jail today. He is being jailed for violating, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really, I don't really understand all the ins and outs of the case. I was hoping that Marty Garbus would be on today to explain the case against him. But obviously the Parasite Chevron has got its grips on another host, not just the city of Richmond, but Stephen Donziger himself and all the campesinos of Ecuador, and apparently Myanmar, Burma, and other places around the world. And we have to unite to fight this thanatocracy that is threatening us literally with death for their personal profit. I would like to now, because we can't have Stephen on today, I would like to now go to a 12-minute report that was done by Vice News about the situation in Ecuador and Donziger's case, and then to Amy Goodman from this morning. She interviewed Stephen early this morning as he was writing me an email saying he wouldn't be able to participate today, and is on his way as we speak to a jail someplace. So Roberto, could you please run the clip from Vice News? Roberto?
Yes, I'm looking.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'll turn off my video and mute myself so that the quality of the video will be better. And thank you so much, Andres, and we will come back to you after we run these two clips and talk about the implications of your struggles in Richmond and the successes that you've had and the failures. We need to learn from your experiences. Sorry, Roberto Artecchi is working on this as here it is.
I always remember a story Umberto talks about a lot of how when he was a little kid, there's an enormous river in front of the village where he lives in the forest. And one day it just became absolutely riven with black oil. When you see the river on fire that your people have depended on for 1,000 years because of oil contamination, you see your life and your future go up in flames. This is called the world's worst oil-related disaster. My name is Stephen Donziger. I was there in Ecuador when indigenous groups and Amazon communities were fighting Chevron in an epic battle for justice.
I apologize for the sound not being available, but we're having some technical problems with our internet here in Mexico, apparently. But I think everyone could read the closed captions and understand the conversation. And Steve's point that Chevron is privatizing the profit and socializing or making public the cost is what we've seen capitalist corporations do around the world. And they do it systematically. They've been doing it for 500 years and they are still doing it. And there's no indication that they will stop. And if privatizing the profits and socializing the costs involves killing people, well, that's why I call them a thanatocracy. Now Stephen has been charged with contempt of court for not handing over his computer and cell phone. And he said he didn't say that, refused to do that. He just appealed the ruling that he do that because he wanted to make sure that his confidential information with his clients and so forth could be kept out of the hands of Chevron. But the judge ruled that he was in contempt of court. He's been under house arrest for over 800 days in his apartment on the Upper West Side. And yesterday he had a court hearing and he was ruled to go to report today to jail so that he's not able to be with us today. But Amy Goodman was able to speak with him early this morning. And so now we're going to play the clip from Democracy Now! And her interview with Stephen from early this morning. So Roberto, if you can get that on, and then we will continue with our discussion with Andres Soto from Richmond about strategies for fighting the fossil fuel industry. And here's Amy.
The environmental human rights lawyer, Stephen Donziger, is reporting to jail today after a federal appellate court rejected his request for bail pending his appeal. Earlier this month, Steve Donziger was sentenced to 6 months in prison for contempt of court, a misdemeanor. Donziger has already spent over 2 years under house arrest after being targeted by the oil giant Chevron. The case stems from Steve's role in suing Chevron on behalf of 30,000 Amazonian indigenous people for dumping 16 billion gallons of oil into their ancestral land in the Ecuadorian Amazon. 10 years ago, Ecuador's Supreme Court ordered Chevron to pay $18 billion. The landmark ruling was seen as a major victory for the environment and corporate accountability. But Chevron refused to pay or clean up the land. Instead, it launched a legal attack targeting Donziger. In July, a federal judge found him guilty of 6 counts of criminal contempt of court after he refused to turn over his computer and cell phone. In an unusual legal twist, the judge appointed a private law firm with ties to Chevron to prosecute Donziger after federal prosecutors declined to bring charges. Amnesty International recently called for his immediate release, saying he was being arbitrarily detained. The UN's Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has also called for his release. Well, as he prepares to report to prison later today, Steve Donziger is joining us from his home in New York, where he's been under house arrest for 813 days. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., there'll be a major news conference held today outside the Capitol. Steve Donziger, welcome back to Democracy Now! Where are you heading to prison today? We're talking about a misdemeanor. You've already been under house arrest for nearly 1,000 days.
It's just extraordinary, Amy. Thank you for the introduction. I mean, it pretty much captured it. What I'll say is I have to report to prison by 4:48 p.m. today, which is in itself highly unusual. I don't believe I'm guilty. No lawyer has ever spent more than 90 days in home confinement, maximum sentence ever given to a lawyer, convicted of my charge, which is misdemeanor contempt. I've already spent over 8 times that at home. And now on top of that, Judge Preska's trying to put me in prison for 6 months. And, you know, another unusual feature is she's making me report, you know, within 24 hours after this latest court ruling that came down yesterday, rather than allowing me time to report, you know, in a normal course to a prison. So there's so much about this.
And which prison are you going to be held at?
I don't know yet. You know, by forcing me in so quickly, Judge Preska, I believe, is trying to force me into a local federal jail that I think is very unsafe. I mean, I have no security risk at all. I've never been convicted. It's the lowest level offense. So normally I would go to a federal prison camp. And, you know, we need time for the Bureau of Prisons to designate me to an appropriate facility. Instead, she's trying to force me very quickly, I think, into, you know, a local jail, which concerns me greatly, frankly. And I think that's one reason why Amnesty International put out an urgent action bulletin 2 days ago for people to write to the Attorney General Garland to just stop this case. I mean, the other crazy thing about this that is so disturbing, Amy, is that I was not prosecuted by the U.S. government. I was prosecuted by a private law firm, Seward and Kissel, appointed by a federal judge after the U.S. government declined to prosecute me. And the judge never disclosed that the law firm had Chevron as a client. So essentially, I'm being prosecuted by a Chevron law firm, a partner in a Chevron law firm, a private law firm, who deprived me of my liberty. I'm the only person ever charged with this offense held pre-trial at home or in prison. Never happened before for even a day. It's over 800 days. So, you know, this is the first corporate prosecution in U.S. history. I have never seen a case like this, nor have other legal experts that work with me. And, you know, we just think, you know, to restore the rule of law as regards Steve Donziger and the people of Ecuador, this case has to be stopped and taken over by the Department of Justice. I mean, they could do what they want with it. I mean, if they want to prosecute me, but I need to be prosecuted by a neutral prosecutor, not by Chevron.
So I want to just talk about some of the people who are supposed to be at your news conference in Washington. We just interviewed a climate striker on a hunger strike in Washington, D.C., and we heard from Congressmember Rashida Tlaib. She'll be there at your news conference. Also, you have Chuy Garcia, Congressmember Jesus Chuy Garcia from Chicago, Congressmember Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, as well as a number of people from Amnesty International, Law Students for Climate Accountability. Talk about the significance. I mean, you have so many supporters at this point at high levels.
I have my Pilates class at 1, so I have to leave here before 12:30. So, I don't know how that's going to work.
It goes way beyond me personally. I mean, on a personal level, it hurts. I have a wife and a 15-year-old
It's just an hour class.
hurting, okay? But let's just...
The hillside, just across the hillside mall.
It's Chevron and it's these two judges and really allies of the fossil fuel industry are trying to use me as a weapon to intimidate activists and lawyers who do this work, who do the frontline work of defending the planet. What's at stake really, I mean, not only my freedom, what's at stake is the ability to advocate for human rights in our society. I mean, the things I was charged with were, I was a lawyer litigating various court orders, you know, for years, ethically. You know, I'm proud of my work. And this judge just went after me. I'm the only lawyer ever in U.S. history to be charged with criminal contempt of court for challenging a civil discovery order on appeal. That's essentially what happened. So, you know, I'm calling on judges and people in Congress like, you know, Representative Tlaib and Jim McGovern and, you know, Cori Bush and others who stepped up for me to continue speaking out, to enlist more people. We need people in the Senate, and ultimately we need the Biden administration. I mean, I heard your previous guest. I mean, the Biden administration is essentially letting a climate change lawyer, me, an environmental justice lawyer, an indigenous rights lawyer, an earth defender, a water protector be locked up on American soil. And it's getting really embarrassing for our country. You know, it's not every day that Amnesty International issues an urgent action for an American citizen. It's probably the second time in 20 years that this has happened, okay? It's not every day that the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention issues an order that someone in the United States, his case is a violation of multiple provisions of international law and shows an appalling degree of a lack of impartiality by judges, you know? So our country needs to deal with this. It really goes to what kind of society we want to live in. And it really relates to the climate issue because, again, I believe this whole thing is being orchestrated by Chevron, not just for Chevron, but for the entire fossil fuel industry. They don't want people speaking out. They don't want successful litigation to hold them to account for their pollution in ways that will help save the planet. And I think ultimately that's what this is about. And people need to pay serious attention to what's
Stephen
happening to me.
Donziger, you have called the devastation in Ecuador the Amazon Chernobyl. Explain why. Explain the original lawsuit that resulted in an $18 billion judgment against Chevron.
Basically, Chevron, in the form of Texaco, its predecessor company, went into the Amazon of Ecuador and decided to create an operational system of literally hundreds of wells where they deliberately dumped toxic waste into waters, into rivers and streams that indigenous groups relied on for their drinking water, bathing, and fishing, creating a mass industrial poisoning of a 1,500 square mile area. And literally hundreds, if not thousands of people have died. I've been there over 250 times. The affected communities went to court. In the court, Chevron wanted the trial to happen in Ecuador. They won the case. Chevron has attacked me, attacked them for 10 years with the help of these federal judges. In the meantime, people are suffering. And, you know, the degree of contamination is appalling. I mean, it is the Amazon Chernobyl. It's the very definition of ecocide, in my opinion. I mean, that's just a deliberate decision in order to save money to dump 16 billion gallons of cancer-causing waste onto indigenous ancestral lands. And the problem is still there. The case has been going on 28 years. And no matter what happens to me, and I hope I'll be okay, I hope I'll get through this, I expect to get through this, the communities in Ecuador are suffering tremendously and they need help. And Chevron needs to step up and comply with the rule of law and pay the judgment that it owes to the people of Ecuador.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Clearly, the fight against oil extraction in the Amazon continues. A lawsuit was filed just last week. Again, you tweeted yesterday around breaking news. You tweeted after, just to give people a sense, after 100 pages of legal briefing, the appellate court today denied my release in 10 words. This is not due process of law, nor is it justice. In these last 30 seconds, is it definite you will be jailed tonight?
Nothing's ever definite. We are going to make one final attempt to go back to my trial judge and ask for more time so I can get properly designated to an appropriate federal prison. I don't know if she'll grant it. We're going to do that shortly. I am prepared and fully expect to, around 2 o'clock today, leave my home on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and report to prison, where I will spend the next 6 months. After
serving over 2 years under house arrest for a misdemeanor, Stephen Donziger, the environmental lawyer targeted by Chevron after he succeeded.
Well, you've heard now from Stephen himself, and we know that Julian Assange is a political prisoner of a state, of a government, but Stephen Donziger is the political prisoner of a corporation. Now, the implications of this for constitutional law in the United States are staggering. Obviously, if Stephen wins his case and Chevron is forced to pay, that will open the floodgates for the fossil fuel industry in general to be sued around the world. Just the cost of cleaning up the messes they have made would of course bankrupt, well, it will bankrupt them. but that's what should happen. And of course, we have to always remember that behind the fossil fuel industry is the US military. The US military has to have fossil fuels to run their fighter jets and their submarines and their all of their military might. So we know that the enemy we are facing will stop at absolutely nothing to crush the peoples of the earth and to preserve their own wealth at the expense of our lives, of course. We are just expendable. But I would like to open up the conversation now to anyone who has a question, a comment. I want to thank everybody for muting themselves and turning off their video, because we have, we're in Mexico, and even though we have internet provided by Telmex, owned by one of the richest people in the world, we do not have adequate internet broadband service in Mexico. If you have a question, please send it to global.justice.cliff@gmail, and Cliff will will unmute himself and share your questions. And if you send them in the chat on Zoom, I will share them with everyone. But the stakes have never been higher. We're going into COP26. The US Congress has not passed Biden's Build Back Better, which is a miserably inadequate to the challenge that is facing us. However, he's going to be going to COP26 empty-handed, no leadership from the main CO2 emitter on the planet, which is the United States, and the US military. There's no discussion about the role of the US military in CO2 emissions, which apparently are about 52 billion cubic tons per year. I have no idea how much that is or what that means. Those numbers are so huge. Perhaps Andres can speak to that, as he's much more familiar. So please send your comments. If you have news, I don't have any other news from Stephen since this morning, since his interview on Democracy Now! And I've had a little news about the Julian Assange. It's not a coincidence. I mean, it is a coincidence that these are both happening at the same time. Freedom of the press is being thrown under the bus. People are now becoming political prisoners of corporations. This is a very, very sad day. It's very scary. Yet Andres has explained how communities can fight back. And I'd love to hear from people who are involved in these struggles to share their comments. Ted Franklin has written Steve Donziger and the Judicial Executioners of the Corporate State. That's an article by Chris Hedges, I believe. Imprisoning the David to Chevron's Goliath is the latest outrage by a US judiciary, now engineered to always favor the interest of capital. An article by journalist Chris Hedges is available on Common Dreams. Please also go to freedonziger.com and contribute to Stephen's Defense Fund. And also please go to Amazon Watch and contribute to the fund for the Amazon, the defense of the Amazon. And Andres is with Communities for a Better Environment. You could also go to their webpage as well to donate. do we have,
Yes, I have a question that has come in by email. This comes from Jürgen Allers. He writes, from what I understand, Steve Donziger has never had a jury. All of his trials have been overseen by a single judge. I'm assuming that the manner in which Donziger's judges were in the pockets of Chevron. Also disturbing is the fact that this monumental case with global implications and the approaching COP26 that now is trying to get all of it here. I believe The Nation was the only publication that has published an extensive investigative report.
I believe that Stephen has never had a jury. And his associate, Marty Garbus, who's a lawyer, was supposed to join us today, but he's very busy trying to get Steve assigned to a safer prison.
I don't think he's actually in the U.S. had a trial. It's all been a series of procedural hearings that have
Correct.
resulted in his house arrest and now the incarceration for contempt. So, yeah, I mean, it's the Star Chamber all over again.
Yes, it is. It's a show trial.
And last week, I have a radio show on KPFA here in the Bay Area, and I interviewed people who are working in solidarity with Julian Assange, and it's the same kind of thing. And so, you know, the irony of the United States, you know, going around lecturing other people about democratic processes is, of course, ludicrous. And you know, frankly, I only refer to it as the United States legal system, not the justice system, because it is a system of legal processes. It is not with the end of, you know, being just. And of course, it's baked into the U.S. Constitution. So, you know, I argue that the Constitution is one of the biggest impediments to obtaining democracy in the United States. It's a rigged structural system designed by oligarchs to benefit the oligarchs. So these kind of situations that we're seeing for Stephen Donziger and Julian Assange are the logical outcome of that constitutional system.
Can I present a question for Andres, perhaps? You've had some success in Richmond in fighting Chevron. It's a very difficult struggle, David against Goliath, but it was possible through the formation of alliances, a coalition. Can you tell us a little bit about how it was that you were able to put together enough forces to be able to counter Chevron?
Sure, and I would go back to 2003 with the creation of the Richmond Progressive Alliance. In 2002, on Cinco de Mayo, myself and my two, college attending sons were the victims of a police riot. We were beaten and pepper sprayed and arrested just for asking why the police department shut down the major thoroughfare in our community. We were the first of dozens of Mexicans who were arrested and put in jail that night. The struggle for justice for that case brought together a whole range of progressive forces that then we made more institutional with the clear objective of running candidates for city council as a slate. Knowing that, the history of Richmond, whenever there was a reformist lone wolf, they're easy to knock off. But if you have every cycle a whole team of people who are running for office, somebody's going to get through. Part of that is communicating a message and challenging many established norms and misconceptions. Chevron had gotten away with, co-opting many elements of the community for decades. And so, we had to make a standard of not accepting corporate funding, and especially Chevron funding. And so each election cycle, more and more, we didn't get everybody elected, but we got some people elected. So we were in a minority for many, many years, but that provided a stand, a platform of which to, offer commentary, introduce, legislation and different, and have someone who can articulate our positions on the city council and ultimately in the mayorship with Gail McLaughlin. It's a dynamic process, but in 2020, under the threat of a lawsuit for violating the civil rights of Latinos under the California Civil Rights Act, the city of Richmond adopted district elections instead of at-large elections. And this ended up allowing the RPA to win in all those seats that were open, because it's like operating on a neighborhood basis. And so we now have a working majority. And I say that to say that there's an inside political game, and then on the outside are the advocates. And so with the fire in 2012, locally, we brought together folks who were interested in environmental justice and created the Richmond Environmental Justice Coalition. We ended up hosting a conference, and there happened to be some funders there who liked what they saw and ultimately offered us 7 years of unrestricted funding. And we ended up calling that the Richmond Our Power Coalition. And it is now made up of about 9 organizations and committed to the idea of a just transition for Richmond. And because we take an expansive view of what the extractive economy is, it's not just about fighting Chevron. We have people who are dealing with food security, and there's an urban farm project. There's folks who are looking at transportation justice, and a bicycle co-op is part of the coalition. There's also the notion that for generations, the prison industrial complex has been an extractive industry, taking people from our community and putting them in rural communities where there's state prisons that become part of their economy. And then they send those people back eventually as damaged people, which then causes us to have to spend inordinate amount of money on law enforcement. So we want to interrupt those kind of cycles of exploitation. That's the Richmond Our Power Coalition. Then there became this broader climate justice advocate network called the Sunflower Alliance, which took its name from the fact that one of the people with the urban ag program told us that sunflowers actually extract toxins out of the soil. So that's kind of become the informal symbol of our movement, is sunflowers. And these people operate as really a network connecting many other local and regional coalitions. And then we also created a coalition that involves 350 Bay Area, 350 South Bay, and a wide range of organizations into what we call the BACMed Network, or the Bay Area Air Quality Management District Network, where our sole focus is dealing with the policies and the politics and rulemaking process within the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. All these groups have been going really since 2012, 2013. So, there's plenty of room, and now there's even some new spinoffs relative to the idea of decommissioning the refineries, and the fact that here in the Bay Area, COVID resulted in the closure of one of the 5 Bay Area refineries, Marathon in Martinez. And now, because of the subsidies available through the low carbon fuel standard in California, the refineries want to move into biofuels. And so they're talking about shutting down the Santa Maria. Phillips 66 is talking about shutting down their Santa Maria refinery, which is the front end of the refinery, and converting the back end of the refinery, which is the Rodeo refinery up here in the Bay Area, into the world's largest biofuel distribution center. And we have been doing research showing that this is really a very dangerous move. It's going to require more water for the crops to produce the vegetable oils. It'll be more deforestation in the Amazon and Indonesia and places like that. And also a greater carbon intensity, particularly with hydrogen production from natural gas. So there's a lot of issues. So there's a whole group that's focusing on this refinery conversion, a new coalition. So, the idea is, getting some focus on specific discrete objectives, and that seems to be the glue that brings these coalitions together.
If I can follow up on that a bit, you talked about a coalition of organizations bringing together a variety of issues, but what segments of Richmond society were mobilized? Richmond, as I understand, not only has a Latino population, but a sizable African-American population and white, multi-class, a lot of people who are working in the refinery and industries, but also other classes. To what extent were these other sectors of the society successfully brought together in a community-based coalition?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that in Richmond, the best reflective of the demographic diversity group is the Richmond Our Power Coalition. So the demographics of the Richmond area are now that it's nearly half Latino. It's like down to about 18% African American, about 20% white, and Asians are close to about 17-18%, almost on par with African Americans. There's been a dramatic depopulation of the African American community with the price of gentrification here in the Bay Area, and so it's a long, complicated history. And in fact, there was only one period of time when Richmond was majority African American, and that was 1980. And so the demographics are constantly in flux. But to your point, with Richmond Our Power Coalition, the Safe Return Project, which deals with the reentry, is African American led. The Urban Tilth, which is the Urban Ag and Food Security Project, its executive director is African American, but a very diverse staff. Rich City Rides, which is the bicycle justice, is African American led. CBE is multiracial, multicultural. We have people from all, white, African American, Latino, Asian. Groups like Asian Pacific Environmental Network have historically focused on the Laotian refugee population that came here at the end of the Vietnam War. Richmond Land and Cooperation Richmond are also multicultural organizations. One is led by a Latina, one is led by an African American woman. So we work with the people who are doing the work, you know, and but some of the more regional groups tend to be more Euro-American dominated. And because it seems like the climate justice movement is still heavily Euro-American, but in frontline communities, indigenous type of organizations, you know, groups that emerge out of the community reflect that community. And so when you see some of the groups like in West Oakland or in Richmond, you're gonna have more of that interethnic mixing. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an amazing model for creating alliances around all of so many different issues, because they're all intimately linked, of course, ultimately. Sally writes to everyone, Sally Latch, the broader implications of this case are that Biden and the oil military power elites have no intention of making the changes needed to save our planet and us from extinction. Well, it's hard to argue with that. More comments, questions? Thank you, Sally. Yeah, my dream has always been an international alliance of all of these organizations. Maybe the Progressive International that did sponsored the Belmarsh Tribunal last week could be part of that. Some organization needs to take the lead. There are lots of other people listening. More comments?
There isn't anything else that's come in by email yet. But let me put that screen up again for those who might need the email address to send your comment or question. It is global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. So jot that down and send us your question. I might, to just continue the conversation a bit, take up a point that Sally mentioned in the chat box, the Biden administration. And I don't want to come to its defense on many things, because it has been a big disappointment in many respects. But one of the things that Biden promised his first week in office was that he was going to make the climate issue the centerpiece. And he appointed John Kerry to head up that, and had hoped to be able to head to COP26. Tomorrow he flies out for those meetings with ambitious climate program. It's looking like he will go pretty empty-handed, but that's not for want of trying. It's that there is not, given the political system of the United States, there isn't the capacity to take bold action, certainly on an issue as controversial as climate, and that involves the curtailing of the fossil fuel industries and their lobbying capacity. So there is that political system that makes it difficult to take decisive action on that, as well as many other issues. But there's another factor too. The gasoline prices have been rising in the US. And as a result, Biden, our climate president, has now been calling on oil producing countries to increase their production of oil in order to bring the price down by increasing the supply. So he kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. As much as he might want to reduce oil production, the economy is structured, the transportation system is structured to require that. You would think that higher gasoline prices would be a good thing because it would discourage people from driving. But actually, the Biden administration finds itself trying to prevent rising gas prices by increasing supply. So there's an interesting contradiction there.
And China plans to have all electric cars and vehicles within a few years, which is astonishing. And that's the kind of innovative leadership that the United States should be taking. We have another question here for Andres. One person asked, how many faith-based groups are in the Richmond Chevron struggle?
Sure. I would say that the faith-based community as it is represented in the BACMed network space with the Contra Costa Interfaith Council. We have not really had much luck in drawing in, say, the Catholic Church or really African American churches into the struggle in Richmond. Most of the Latinos are with the Catholics, but because we have a growing Central American population, we have a substantial number of small evangelical Protestant storefront churches as well. But yeah, I would say it's been more the Contra Costa Interfaith Council has been a very active participant in the BACMed network, and in fact, I'm going to have the director of the Interfaith Council present at our members meeting tomorrow night, CB Richmond members meeting, because he went up to be a witness at the Line 3 site up north. And so he's going to come back and give us a report on that. So, yeah, that's how I would answer that.
Thank you, Andres. Okay. Andres has signaled an article in grist.org that tells about more recent struggle in depth of how climate legislation is crafted to delay air pollution reduction. Obviously, we know that they've been stalling ever since the very first Earth Day, oh so many years ago, and they will continue stalling. But I think we've reached a critical mass where people around the world are no longer going to accept postponement as an answer. And I think we need to stay tuned to more alliances and work on creating more alliances with groups everywhere to fight this. And I think we also need to pay close attention to the Chevron case, because that will obviously have a huge impact. Does anyone want to add anything, Andres?
Yeah, what I was going to add to that is, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't say that money is the glue that helps keep many of these broader coalitions together. The Richmond Our Power Coalition was able to establish itself and actually build upon itself and bring other organizations in because of a family foundation. The Course Foundation gave us 7 years worth of funding, but we're part of a network of other communities they identified, an Alaskan indigenous organization, some folks from Eastern Kentucky, you know, in coal country, and then some people in Detroit. And so all four communities are very different in their appearances, but have very common struggles. And by giving us the multi-year funding to grow and develop has been critical. And I would say also that that's important so that younger people who are working and need to be working and want to work in this arena can actually have jobs that will sustain them to do this work. Otherwise, you know, they got to go work somewhere else. And so putting money into these types of projects and programs is a critical thing. For those of us who are older, I'm 66 now. You know, if you're retired, you have more time. You can pick and choose where you want to spend your time. If you're working, you know, you feel very fortunate to be able to work in this kind of arena and get paid for it. And it shouldn't be like that. You know, I mean, the corporations literally have thousands and thousands of people working for them on their payroll to do the bidding of the corporation. You know, at the city council meeting last night, it was on display. In Richmond, you know, Chevron has, you know, people that, you know, work the streets and work the organizations and do that. So that's what we're up against is, you know, our money versus their money. But the thing that we have is we have compassion and the hearts and minds of the people and not just strictly profit motive. So that's, you know, I call them out all the time as international gangsters. And I have no shame in calling them that.
That's what they are. So thank you. That's exactly accurate. And once again, if you can, make a donation to freedonziger.com or the Amazon Watch or Communities for a Better Environment. What is the other name of your organization, Andres?
Well, that's Communities for a Better Environment is a member of the Richmond Our Power Coalition, the BackMed Network, all these different formations. So, yeah, it could go straight to CBE.
Okay, great, great. And those of us who are retired are dedicating our time and efforts to the struggle. And we will look forward to an update about Stephen Donziger, which we will have as soon as possible. I'm not sure when. And next Monday, we will have a program on, climate activism. And we're going to show a documentary film about the September 20th, 2019 rally here in San Miguel Allende. The young people here are very concerned about the climate and the water situation, which here in Mexico is just catastrophic. That will be next Monday, November the 1st, 1 p.m. Mexican Central Time, Mexico time, 2 p.m. Central Daylight Time in the U.S. I think the U.S. goes back to daylight time during this week, but Mexico doesn't. 3 p.m. Eastern,
The other way around.
or it's the other way around. Yeah. Anyway, we've got the correct times up there, Mexico time, and then Central and Eastern for the U.S. and Canada. And thank you everyone for joining today. I'm sorry that Stephen Donziger was not able to join us, but we're very fortunate to have a new friend, Andres Soto, join us from Richmond, California. And thank you all for tuning in today. Hope to see you next Monday.
Peace out, yeah.